All right. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Jennifer Morrell. I'm the CEO of the Elections Group. And for those of you who might be joining us for the first time, the Elections Group partners with state and local election officials to implement new programs or improve processes for voters and stakeholders. We provide guidance, resources, and direct management support for states and local jurisdictions. And our team is made up of former election officials and election experts from across the United States. And we're so pleased to have you all with us today for tips for mastering ballot management strategies. I'm really excited to be joined by two members of our team today, Mike Susek and Matt Tlachac, and we're going to give each of them a minute here to introduce themselves, give you a little bit about their background and the work and role that they play at the Elections Group. So Matthew, let's start with you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today. As Jennifer mentioned, my name is Matthew Tlachac. Prior to joining TAG in September of last year, I was an election official in the state of Ohio. I served both at the state and the county level, and just excited to be with you folks. And this is a fun topic, an important topic, and happy to be a part.
Thanks, Matt. Mike?
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Susek. I have been with the Elections Group for a little shy of 2 years now. Prior to that, I was a local election official in Pennsylvania and also in Colorado, going all the way back to 2004 when we were just trying to implement TAVA. So been here a little while, and I really do enjoy, oddly enough, I really enjoy ballot reconciliation. So it's kind of how I ended up on this project. But I do a lot of research and writing and training on a variety of topics with the group. So happy to be here.
Super. I'm just excited to have you both. And as Matthew said, this is a really exciting topic. Anybody who's joining us today, who's participated in one of my training sessions on post-election audits knows that ballot management is an important part of how we prepare ourselves for a successful audit. And so we decided it was so important that we felt like it needed a training of its own, not just being part of our audit training. So what you're going to see today is part of a more extensive course that we've developed for ballot management. It's meant to be a 4-hour course. At the end of this month, the Elections Group will be launching our very own online learning platform, where this training will be available in an online self-guided format in its entirety. We've also presented an abbreviated version of this course at state and national conferences. And so we hope today's session not only gives you some new ideas about improving your own ballot management practices, but we also hope that it serves as a teaser that you'll want to go in and either go through that full course once it's available online, or maybe invite us to present at one of your election conferences this summer. I will just note that the Q&A feature is going to be available for today's discussion. So if you have any questions during our conversation, please do ask them there, and we'll do our best to get to those. At the end, we may also pull out some of those questions during the presentation. We're also placing some links to the resources that we'll be covering today, and those will be in the chat. So let's go ahead and launch our presentation. We'll go to the next slide. Great. So when we talk about ballot management, there's actually 4 areas that we plan to cover. And as I mentioned, we'll go through this fairly quickly today, but we want to talk about ballot organization, ballot accounting, ballot reconciliation, and chain of custody. I want to start by showcasing a couple of headlines. Hopefully, these don't give any of you too much anxiety. I know we've seen headlines like these in the past. There's certainly nothing new. In fact, I know there are probably some of us who have experienced some of these. Maybe they didn't make them into the headlines. One of the things that we've been thinking a lot about this year as we think about the continued scrutiny that we're under is how do we avoid this? How do we avoid not just having a headline that can be embarrassing, but having a headline like this that can potentially plant the seed for or fuel mistrust of elections, or plant the seed for further conspiracy theories or misunderstandings about how elections are ran. So hopefully this picture, if you are feeling some tension or anxiety looking at those headlines, looking at this picture maybe brings a little bit of calm. I want you just to take a minute, look at it, think about what sort of story a picture like this is telling us. What are some of the things that you see pictured here? In addition to large bins, do we see order, organization, maybe some labeling? We see security seals. We could probably spend a lot of time dissecting both the good and the bad of this, but we hope that it is a good sort of thought, activity, or lead into what we think of as ballot management. So what do we mean when we say ballot management? This really refers to the practices, the forms, and the materials that election officials use to account for ballots for all stages of the election, from when they're first printed until the end of the retention period. It includes all of the paper trails and logs and reports and forms that you provide as evidence that your ballots were managed in a secure and a systematic way. And there are 4 pillars, and you saw those in the intro slide. The first is ballot organization. This is how we physically organize and store and transport thousands of ballots during the pre-election period, early voting, election day, and again during the post-election period. This is really the foundation of how we ensure the controlled handling of voted and unvoted ballots. Next is ballot accounting. Matt's going to talk about that. I should mention Mike's going to talk about ballot organization. Next will be ballot accounting. Matt will cover that. And this is how we consistently and accurately confirm and document our ballot inventory counts throughout the election cycle. So if you use a print vendor, it might be the way that you confirm you had 1,000 ballots for a particular precinct that you requested, you received 1,000, you packed 1,000. It's the way that we track and account for those. Next is ballot reconciliation. Matthew will also cover this. This is the process of comparing the number of voters who receive credit for voting to the number of ballots tabulated. Sometimes we refer to those as ballots cast. And then finally, and this is really important, chain of custody, and we'll go back to Mike for this. Chain of custody is how officials track who access ballots, when and where, from the time they were first received through the retention period. This is the evidence trail that documents authorized access and also establishes that no ballot access goes undetected. Finally, why does this matter? Why is this important? Hopefully, I don't need to tell anyone listening to this the why. The headlines hopefully conveyed most of that, but ballot management and ballot integrity are really foundational. They help us validate our results and turnout. They instill confidence among staff and public. They're absolutely essential in reducing the likelihood of mistakes happening. And if mistakes do happen, because we know that happens, this is a human process, they provide a systematic way to identify and solve those issues. And they provide critical evidence of ballot security. So enough of an introduction. I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
All right. Hello. Good morning, everybody. So our first pillar that we're going to discuss is ballot organization. So kind of before we get to all the paperwork and logs and balancing, we want to start thinking about spatial organization. You'll see in the links, we do have a link to our guide on this topic if you want to go into a little more detail, called Everything in Its Place. And so let's see here. Okay, so ballot organization, what is it exactly? Ballot organization is how election officials physically move, organize, store, transport their ballots. This is all the effort that we go into managing that process. And when you think about it, in elections, despite all the computer systems that we have and databases and election equipment, we manage paper. We manage volumes of paper. Small jurisdictions may have tens of thousands, thousands or tens of thousands of ballots. larger jurisdictions, hundreds of thousands of ballots or more. So how do we keep track of them throughout all of the different processes? So our guide, when you go into the guide that we produced, there's going to be two sections. One's going to cover a little bit more of the materials and equipment that's associated with ballot organization. This morning, we're just going to focus on some of the principles of ballot organization. Some of you may be familiar with some of the business systems or business methodologies called Lean or Six Sigma. These are all about election improvement. Sorry, the systems are all about business improvement, how to eliminate inefficiencies in processes, how to improve the products that are produced and service delivery. It's all about continuous improvement. One of the methodologies that comes out of the lean side of that is called 5S. So the 5S system is used by a lot of industries, warehousing, laboratories, to help spatially organize their workspaces. And we think that this can apply very, very well to elections administration as well. It's all about using simple practices, visual cues, reinforcement principles. And we're going to show you how we think that can apply to ballot organization. Okay, so the first principle is called sort. So you may recognize the little meme here about, does this spark joy? So when we're talking about ballot organization and we're talking about sorting, we're talking about evaluating the necessity of the different items in your workspace, and it's associated with the activity of red tagging. Going through, looking for things that maybe don't belong anymore, things that are archaic or not used. I like to think of two different approaches to sorting. The first, I like going through a workspace and looking for just big ticket items that maybe don't belong. For example, when I go to a new office, I find that they typically have a dot matrix printer. Nobody has used this dot matrix printer for perhaps years. It may have been printing old poll books. So, but yet it still sits there. So red tagging those big ticket items that maybe can go off to storage or electronics recycle. The other flip side of sorting is taking a look at your individual workspaces and trying to figure out which specific items do and don't belong there, which actually add value to the process. Go next slide, please. So the question came up as we were going through this, well, who decides what's important? This is a really good exercise that can be partnered with experienced staff who actually do know the process as well, but maybe partnering up with new staff. The new staff maybe aren't as committed to the old way of doing things and perhaps could spot things that are directly needed to conduct the different stages of ballot processing. Okay, so once you've gone through and you've kind of cleared your work area of unnecessary items, you can move on to the second principle, which is setting in order. Setting in order is all about arranging your workspace so that needed equipment and supplies are easy to identify, easy to access. This is all about labeling and signage. So that as your ballots move through the different stages, you can easily identify what the different bins are, what the different batches of ballots are. You may wish to have large signs to identify what the different workstations are. You can use color coding, labels for all the different shelves that ballots are going to go onto. I also like to apply this to the actual materials that we use and the equipment that we use in ballot processing. For example, if you see your ballot receiving stage, you may want to identify the objects that go there so that if something goes missing, it could be quickly returned to that location. Okay, so once you have your areas kind of cleared up of things that don't belong there and you've got everything organized and visually everything's starting to make sense, the next step is shine. Shine is all about cleaning up the workspace, keeping it clear, keeping it tidy. And there's a couple reasons that this is important. For one, I think it's the final bullet here, but I think it's the most important. It does instill confidence in staff, in observers, in the press. You're gonna have a lot of visitors to your workspace, and you want to convey a message that this is an organized workspace, this is a clean workspace. Some other things that are important, as you're cleaning your workspace daily, it's a great opportunity to identify broken seals, obstructed security cameras. We're moving a lot during the election from one location to another into temporary workspaces. We are unfortunately leaving our cell phones around. We are leaving our day planners around. It's a great opportunity to identify things that might go missing. Also, it's an opportunity to identify if, for example, there may be a leak somewhere that's going to lead to a bigger problem. This is a great opportunity to to identify that by having some daily cleaning. Our equipment, a lot of our equipment have belts, camera lenses that need to be cleaned in order to run efficiently. So shine is the third critical principle. And finally, the last two principles, sorry, are really more reinforcement than actionable. So the first is standardize. Standardize is all about trying to find ways to make this a regular part of your workflow. One thing that you can do, this involves your checklists. This involves your standard operating procedures. Another thing that, pardon me, a sip of water. Okay, thank you. Another thing that this can involve, again, I mentioned your checklists, other visuals, perhaps scheduling daily time for 5S activities. So don't save your 5S activities, your cleaning, your organizing, your sorting, till everybody's gone home and there's just 1 or 2 people left. Have this, actually maybe cut your shift short by 30 minutes and spend that last 30 minutes going through your organizing and cleaning. And the final principle is sustain. So sustain is all about not just working this into the workflow, but actually working it into the work culture through leadership buy-in, through budgeting, through training. So that is the final principle. So moving on. So what we're going to do next is show you a little exercise. This will be available in our online course. So I won't, it's fully explained when we go in, but it's just a little teaser of something that's going to be available.
Welcome to our 5S activity. In this exercise, you will be shown an image depicting 10 batches of ballots. Each batch might look something like this. Fonts, formats, and orientation may be different for each batch. In each round, you will have 10 seconds to try and find each batch in order, from 1 through 10. Your score for each round is the highest numbered batch you can find, starting with 1 and going in sequential order. In each round, we will apply one of the 5S principles to create better organization for your batches. Remember, each image will only appear for 10 seconds. Do not click pause. Have fun and good luck. Round 1. Did you find all the batches? In round 2, we apply the sort principles to the same image and remove anything that does not belong around our ballot batches. Are you ready? See how many batches you can find, again starting with batch 1. Round 2. All right, how did round 2 go? Did it help that we removed some of the visual clutter? For round 3, we will apply the set in order principle and apply uniform labels for each batch. Are you ready? Let's go. Round 3. How did you do this time? Did labeling each batch the same way improve your score? In round 4, let's apply the shine principle and clean up some of the stray marks and scribbles from the screen. Are you ready? Round 4. What was your score for round 4? Did cleaning the visual workspace help? In 5S, the final 2 principles really help reinforce the first 3. For this final round, we are going to break convention and apply the set in order principle again, making sure everything goes exactly where it belongs. Are you ready? Round 5. How did you do? Looking back, did your score increase each round? We hope this exercise helped demonstrate how impactful some simple organizational principles can be to a more efficient workspace. Before we wrap up, let's see what this all looks like back to back.
All right, great. Well, thank you for participating in that exercise. I'm going to hand this off to Matt for ballot accounting.
Thanks, Mike. Ballot accounting. What do we mean when we talk about ballot accounting? Well, it's essentially the process of consistently and accurately recording the number of ballots, in this case, in the office's possession at any given point in time, and then documenting any changes to those ballots throughout the election cycle. Election officials use ballot accounting to take inventory of the number of ballots allocated and used for each election. So the accounting begins when the first ballot is printed and continues throughout the retention cycle and storage of those ballots after the election. Election officials rely on business systems to provide counts that aid in the ballot accounting process. So some of these systems you're familiar with. They might include your voter registration system, which is often used to issue and track by mail or absentee ballots, as well as the election management system, which is used to scan and ultimately tabulate the ballots. So accounting performed by election officials relies upon compiling totals, often retrieved through a manual count, but also through reports that are provided by these various systems. These practices allow for checks and balances to take place during the ballot processing that goes on within your office. There's also other forms, including ballot order forms or delivery manifests, that a vendor may use to print paper ballots that will be a part of this ballot accounting process. It also includes reports from ballot marking devices or ballot on demand printers detailing the number of ballots printed, as well as any mail processing equipment that's used to send out ballots. It's really, really important that election officials have a well-documented process for ballot accounting. It's not fair, it's not good for anybody in your organization to just figure it out on their own. There should be documentation that identifies who's responsible for reviewing the information compiled and who's responsible for supervising the process of ballot accounting. It's also really important that you train all of those individuals involved in the process before each election. Staff should be trained on the portion of the process they are responsible for handling. In addition, poll workers administering early or election day voting should also be trained on this process that they're responsible for completing. So as you think about your own ballot accounting practices, first we think about what needs to be counted, what needs to be accounted for. So we would look at our own individual ballots, the types of ballots that we have, and this is a sample list of the types of ballots you may have. You have ballots that are issued, you have ballots that are received, you have ballots that are counted, you have ballots that are replicated, ballots rejected, and you also have ballots that are spoiled. So these are all like the stages of where the ballot might be. But in addition to these stages, jurisdictions, election officials often overlay these categories with other groupings such as provisional ballots, mail-in or absentee ballots, early ballots, accessible ballots, UOCAVA ballots, nursing home ballots, jail voting ballots, and of course you also have your election day ballots. So as we build this list of ballots to be accounted for, we can put these into subcategories. So for example, in the top left there, you see we have in-person. Well, what stage of a ballot might an in-person ballot take? Well, we know you're going to issue the ballot. Ultimately, the ballot will be received and then counted. And also a ballot could be spoiled. If the voter makes a mistake in marking their ballot, that stage of the ballot would be a spoiled ballot. So as you go through and think about building your own process, start by identifying all of the ballots that you will have to account for and list those out. Next, you'll want to identify when accounting will occur. And this is really part of the training process as well, to ensure that the accounting happens at those specified and expected times. So when, we mean not specific dates, but rather what events involve accounting. Election officials, must lay out the procedural path a ballot travels, identify when responsibility over that ballot changes, how the chain of custody is recorded, and how the quantities are verified. So accounting should occur anytime ballots are really physically moved, whenever the ballots enter a new processing stage or responsibility changes. So much like chain of custody, accounting will be coupled often with those events. So on the screen here is just an example of like the life cycle of a ballot. And I would encourage you as an election official to do the same with your processes. So pick a type of ballot that you have. Maybe it's mail ballots, maybe it's your absentee ballots, and document each stage of that ballot's life cycle, if you will. And then identify, once you've listed all of those different stages, identify when you feel accounting needs to occur. And then once you've identified when accounting needs to occur, ask yourself, what is actually being done during those processes? Is it a comparison of reports? Is it a manual hand count of a certain item? What is it, and who is doing it at that time? So one of the big focuses that we all have had to encounter to some degree is an influx of by-mail ballots, and some jurisdictions throughout the country have to shift their process to focusing more on accounting for centrally counted ballots. So what I want to do in the next few moments here is just kind of go through this process a little bit and identify two really important parts of ballot accounting. And one is creating a ballot manifest. The other is creating a ballot tracking form to identify and account for all of the ballots that are part of the central counting process. So on the screen, you see several different key points that I want to hit on. One is creating a uniform batch size. So when we talk about processing centrally counted ballots, in this case, let's just identify them as mail ballots. You would pick a manageable number of ballots that would be included in a batch. So maybe that's 50, maybe that's 100 in your batch, and that would be what you keep all of your batches at, that uniform number. Next is you'll use a batch tracking form to identify all the stages that ballot takes as it comes into your office and who's going to do the accounting at every point. So that form would be completed in order to account for those ballots. We want to make sure that you're not relying on a voting system during this process. This is a hand count, this is a manual count. Folks are actually going through and ensuring that that's the number that's in each batch. And ultimately, that information is going to all be recorded on a ballot manifest. So let's quickly walk through what we mean by this. So starting with the batch tracking form. The batch tracking form is used to account for the number of ballots in each batch as it moves through the various stages of ballot processing. So when ballots are first received, they are counted into individual unique batches. It's important to account for the quantity in each batch, including any ballots removed due to signature discrepancies or other issues that may occur as you go through the accounting and review process. So the goal is to identify any count discrepancies between each stage of processing and to help validate the overall integrity of the handling process. So on the next screen, you'll notice that there's a batch tracking form that TAG has recently developed, along with other folks who have contributed to this process and shared ideas. And you may think back on your own processes and realize you have a similar form that you use that works well for you. But basically, the batch tracking form is used in the accounting process not only to identify when the ballots come in and how many there are, but also just really to document the lifespan of that particular batch of ballots. Now, on the next several screens, we have some close-ups of the various sections. In our coursework that we're preparing right now, we will go into depth how to use this form. But if you don't already have something like this, please, I would encourage you to think about putting something together so that the central count process, when ballots are coming in, they're being maintained and accounted for appropriately. I mentioned earlier that the batch tracking form ties into how a ballot manifest is built. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with a ballot manifest is a log that documents how many ballots from your voting system were scanned and where they are located. So the concept of this ballot manifest starts in states that actually conduct risk limiting audits. So for risk limiting audits, it's important to be able to track down individually scanned batches or even individual ballots within the batch. So the organization and the accounting of those ballot batches is really important. So there was growing recognition that independently verifying the number of ballots in your possession as an important component of any type of tabulation audit, not just RLAs. For that reason, this very simple design spreadsheet, which I'll show you next, or paper log should always be created independent of the voting system, even if the voting system produces some sort of batch level report. So when we talk about ballot manifests, we're talking about something, again, that's completely unique to any reporting that's done through your voting system. And it's a log of how many ballot cards your voting system scanned and where they are located. So as you can see on the left-hand side, you have the jurisdiction, or in this case, the county name, a batch name, and then how many are identified in those batches. And you'll see here that there's a combination of various types of ballots, not necessarily in uniform batches, if they were scanned maybe at a precinct, or maybe they were scanned at a early vote location and they weren't kept in uniform batches. So here's just another example of some ballot manifest forms. They're very easy to create, but obviously important as part of the accounting process. And how you build that ballot manifest, often you'll use these labels that you put on your various secured containers that hold the ballots during processing, and you'll record those numbers then on the ballot manifest. And if we go to the next slide, you'll notice that you're compiling, again, various ballot types from various types of equipment even as we go through. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. See here that you're using information that's contained on the voting equipment as part of the ballot manifest to maintain how many ballots were used or scanned in that scanner. Again, if you haven't done this process of creating a ballot manifest, I would encourage you to join us as we talk more about this in future courses. Finally, I want to touch on ballot reconciliation. So ballot reconciliation is the act of ensuring that the number of voters credited with returning a ballot aligns with the number of ballots actually returned and cast. And why is it important? Well, it's essential to ensuring a fair, open, accurate election. And I would add to that slide a transparent election. It also is important because it avoids those headlines, the negative headlines that we showed, and limits the nonsensical scrutiny of the process. It provides self-assurance and pride to you as an election official that things are done correctly. And we know that ballot reconciliation has to happen every day. It happens before, on, and after Election Day. It starts when the first ballot is provided to a voter, and it happens frequently, and it must happen daily. So this wheel here kind of breaks down what's involved in ballot reconciliation. It involves ensuring that ballots cast correlate to a voter. It ensures that you maintain good records, that you review and maintain proper accounting, that you remain transparent. It allows for education of the public about what happens after an election. It dedicates time and human resources, and it's really quality control, checking your work to ensure that the process is being done correctly. One of the important tools that election officials are already really familiar with are ballot reconciliation logs. And it goes by different names. Could be a ballot accounting chart, could be a ballot reconciliation chart. However you term it, you've probably used one. It's basically a form to record and compare the total number of ballots used to the number of voters who participated in the election. And it's a record of what happens, whether that be at an early vote center prior to Election Day, if your jurisdiction has early voting, or maybe at a polling location on Election Day. And it's a record of what happens here so that you can know whether or not your numbers are going to compare to one another or not. And if they don't compare, you'll know for what reason they didn't compare. So what the elections group has recently done is we've worked with partners to create a ballot reconciliation log that essentially could be used by election officials to utilize in their own day-to-day operational reconciliation practices. So this ballot reconciliation log may look different than one you're familiar with, but what we used here is a sidewalk style layout where the information and the instructions are on the left-hand side of the page. And it indicates very clearly the required sections. And it also includes those helper instructions that will allow an individual to complete this properly. At least that's the goal. One of the things that we would just encourage on a blanket level is that if you are using a new form for the first time, or maybe you have a form and you notice that it's not always being completed accurately, it's really important that you test that form with a group of individuals who would be completing it in real life so that you can take that feedback and that information that's provided in that test to make the form better or to make improvements so that the form is more easily completed. But a ballot reconciliation log is just really important to the overall process, and it can be used in a variety of instances, whether that's early voting, as I mentioned, or on election day. But again, it's important that people complete it correctly. So what we wanted to do with this design is provide you with an opportunity to maybe look at how your form's designed and design it maybe in a different way to help elevate that completion level and accuracy rate. One of the things that we've incorporated into this ballot reconciliation log, which we can share with you, is a section where, if you can go back to the next slide too, please. What we're doing here is we wanted to include a portion of the form, of the log, for folks to document problems that might occur. So this might be somebody gets a ballot on election day, they go to place it in the scanner after marking it, and it doesn't work. The ballot doesn't go in for some reason, they get frustrated and they leave the location. Or likewise, it could happen with a voter coming into a location and marking their ballot on the ballot marking device, but the ballot ultimately is not accepted because they didn't go to the final portion of the screen. We would term that as like a fleeing voter or an abandoned ballot. Those instances can easily be logged on this ballot reconciliation log, so that if you have issues after the election as you're doing your reconciliation, you can identify why that issue occurred. So on your screen here is just an opportunity for folks to think about what are some of the issues that occur during the reconciliation process. And one thing that always frustrated me as an election official is it never ended up balancing the way you'd want to. And there's always those little intricacies, those little problems that occur that you have to look into to determine why it didn't balance the way you expected it to with the number of voters to the number of ballots. So one thing I would encourage folks to do is think about what is a reason that there be more election day ballots than election day voters. And if I just ask anyone to do that really quickly in just like a few seconds, it's hard to sometimes come up with the reasons that that might occur. Obviously, in this case, if there's more election day ballots than election day voters, a simple answer might be maybe somebody didn't get checked into the poll book the way they should have been, and therefore there's more ballots than actual voters that checked in. But what we wanted to do is create a resource for you, and that's the ballot reconciliation troubleshooting guide. And basically, it's a list of those various problems that you might encounter and some reasons why that might have occurred. And hopefully you can find this as a helpful resource that you can use after your election and during your reconciliation process. Thank you. And finally, I wanted to just touch on one really important thing that we've unfortunately seeing a lot of in the headlines now, and that's dealing with election night reconciliation. So on election night, we know that we are providing to the public typically unofficial numbers. But my question to you is that, does the public know that? So when we think about election night reconciliation, some of the important things that I just wanted to hit on is that election officials should be comparing the voter turnout to the number of ballots counted when they release those final results. And using a checklist or an inventory control system to ensure that each memory stick is properly processed will go a long way in ensuring that the election night results are as complete as possible. It's also important that you have multiple staff members involved in this process to verify the accuracy of what is being reported to the world. And you want to look for anomalies in the data set. So for example, if a certain precinct has a way higher turnout percentage than another precinct, maybe closely in geographical location to the other one, or proximity rather, well, it might be that that memory stick was uploaded twice into your election management system. So we know that most jurisdictions already have these safeguards in place, and you may have developed these fail-safes to ensure that doesn't happen, but it's very important that you have a built-in and robust process to ensure that the election night information that we provide is as accurate and as complete as possible. And it's also important to let the public know that the results displayed on election night are often incomplete and unofficial because of the number of outstanding ballots that still need to be tabulated. It's really important nowadays for us to set expectations that what might be reported on election night may not be the complete totals and may change the outcome of the election based on number of ballots that are outstanding. And we want to provide this information and make sure that the media and the press are understanding of this as well. So I would encourage you to use social media and your own website to inform the public of what to expect, inform stakeholders such as candidate campaigns and other voter organizations to help spread the word. Explain your reconciliation process to the public and media, because the work you do to maintain an accurate election is really important. And we all know that you have checks and balances already in place, but I would just encourage you to take another look at your accounting and your reconciliation practices to make them as robust as possible. And I will hand it off to my colleague, Mike.
All right, great. Thank you, Matt. And so I think that's a great segue to go into chain of custody. And actually, this whole two sections just reminded me, when I was an election official, I used to say to people that I really had two jobs. The first job was to conduct the election, right? To do everything correctly and accurately and securely. And the second part of my job was being able to retell that entire story end to end to the public, to candidates, to canvass boards, to the courts. So this whole process of documenting and keeping track of everything kind of lends itself to my old approach. So chain of custody is all about the evidence that we produce during the election of a secure handling of ballots and other important materials. One moment here. So the definition of chain of custody is, back one. It's the processes and documentation that election officials use to establish the secure handling of ballots at all times. Strong chain of custody supports the authenticity of ballots and the integrity of election outcomes. Really, it lets us account for where the ballots were at all times during the election, who accessed them, who handled them. So chain of custody is going to, we can proceed to the next slide, please. So chain of custody is going to track who was in possession of the ballots, what were the different types of ballots and quantities that may have been in their possession, where were they going, what was the event, what was the reason that people were accessing the ballots during all the different election events before and after. So chain of custody kind of lends itself to a question. We're going to go into the processes and the forms and documentation in just a moment, but if ballots are already secure, we already have security cameras, we already have locks and key cards and background checks, why do we need chain of custody in addition to all of that? What is the value that's provided by chain of custody? Well, not only do we have to provide for secure, accurate handling of ballots, we have to be able to produce the evidence that we did exactly that. So it's one thing to tell the public, well, all of our ballots are secure in a locked room, everything's under camera. It's another thing to actually have the documentation of every single event that occurred during the election that involved handling the ballots. So we kind of divided this into three different ways that chain of custody adds additional value to the election process. The first is thinking about chain of custody as evidence. So election officials have to account for their materials and their systems at all times. So even though ballot access is controlled and it's limited to authorized persons, every one of those events has to be documented. So your detailed chain of custody logs are going to establish who had access to the ballots at what time and for what purpose. So another important element of chain of custody is even though our facilities are secure, we have to make sure that every location is secure by bridging any sort of gaps that we might have in security and monitoring. And that's not to raise an alarm, it's just to admit a reality. A lot of our ballots go off-site to polling places. Our ballots may be processed. We may have a temporary facility in our location. We may have vendors that are helping us move ballots back and forth. So there are going to be times where maybe a ballot has to go into a vehicle, into a poll worker's vehicle to bring the voted ballots back. So chain of custody is really how we establish that there was no sort of security breach when ballots were transferred off-site or brought back to our central count location. So a good chain of custody is a way to really make every location to provide evidence that every location was a secure location. So next, chain of custody provides a way for us to detect and remediate any sort of security event that may have happened with ballots. Now, when you think about a combination lock or a padlock or a deadbolt on a door, those provide security, but staff can access the ballots during that time. Chain of custody provides us a way to detect whether or not ballots have been accessed. So this could be due to, for one, people may have accessed ballots appropriately to transfer them or to conduct a recount. It also allows us people also access ballots. There may have been an honest oversight, an accident. Unfortunately, there may be internal threats that could lead to a security breach. Doors may be accidentally left unlocked or propped, or a ballot container may have been stored in a different location of an office than we expected. So logs allow us to quickly detect that during those periods that we know that those ballots were actually not accessed, maybe nobody opened the ballot container, and we can use the chain of custody logs to, one, to affirm that a breach in security did not happen, but also to detect that if there was any sort of breach in security, because again, a locked door looks the same before and after it's been opened and closed, a chain of custody and seal logs will help us confirm that nothing actually happened during those events. So what are some common chain of custody events? Generally, you're going to be establishing chain of custody at almost any time ballots are moving or being transferred or handled or accessed. This can include delivering ballots to and from your polling places, retrieving and receiving mail ballots, perhaps moving ballots through the different processes in central count, preparing ballots for retention. Really, anytime that ballots are being moved or accessed, you want to establish a record of those events. Chain of custody also provides critical evidence for recounts, for audits, for litigation. This is absolutely critical for those events. For example, but let's emphasize, we all know that elections are, as Matt was just referring, elections are not done on election night. Those are unofficial results that we're posting, and we're moving into our reconciliation, removing into our post-election audits, any recounts, any possible litigation. It is critical that we maintain the integrity of the ballots during those processes, so that when we conduct a recount, we can ensure that those ballots are in the same exact condition that they were when we brought them back from the polling place to the beginning of the recount or the beginning of the audit. So likewise, if there may be any sort of challenge or legal remedy sought during election, your ballots are your evidence, and you're going to want to have very strong chain of custody to guarantee that the integrity, that what I call like the pristine state of those ballots. You want to make sure that during the entire post-election, you have evidence that those ballots were maintained securely and appropriately. All right, so how do we do all this? Chain of custody is established through two main things. First, we have our chain of custody seal logs, and then we have the chain of custody seals themselves. So a chain of custody seal log is simply a printed form that we're going to use that we're going to document the inspection, removal, and application of seals. So the formats are going to vary. We'll share one in just a moment here. Generally, it's going to provide a space to document the ballot box serial number or the case number, the date and time of the event, what was the opening seal number. So what was this, when you received your voted ballots, what was the seal number that was recorded at the polling place? It's going to provide a space for you to record the new seal number when you reseal the ballot container. And obviously space to record the signature or initials of authorized witnesses and a description of the event itself. So before we go any further, just one best practice that we can't overemphasize: chain of custody, like all the other forms that we complete, this is best done in bipartisan teams, or at least two persons who are not from the same political party. So you never want to complete a chain of custody form by yourself or members of the same party. All right, so next we have just a sample ballot, a sample chain of custody form that you can use in your office. We're happy to, if you need help developing a form or you have one that you want to share with us to take a look at, look for ways to improve it, we're absolutely happy to do that. As you look through this form, the top of the form is going to have a location for you to record the ballot box number, the date, who are the members who may have been retrieving the ballots, any transfer bag numbers. The middle section is going to document the time of the event. We encourage not just putting the hour of the day, but also the AM or PM, or using 24-hour military time. A place to record the seal. Another best practice here is we like to have a place for, especially if it's a tape seal, when you remove the seal from the bin, simply affix it to the chain of custody log. That way you have a record of what the original, not only do you have a written record of the original seal number, but you actually have the original seal number there. Then we have a series of boxes that you can check to kind of go through and make sure your process was done correct. And then finally at the end, a section to sign off that everything was done completely. Everything was done correctly, rather. So another important practice here when it comes to chain of custody seal logs, make sure that the logs themselves get sealed. You want to make sure that the kind of the appropriate steps that you would follow. First, you're going to inspect and record the seal number. Then you're going to complete the seal log. And what you want to do is actually place the completed seal log inside the container and seal the log inside the container. Now, that may depend on what kind of container you're using or what kind of ballot transfer bag you are using, but you kind of want to have what I call that Karnak moment when you open the container and you verify that the seal number on the outside was the same as the recorded seal number. So it's just another way to make sure that nobody had access to the actual seal log. All right, so moving on, I know we're going to be bumping up to our time here, so I'll just a few more things. The flip side to the seal logs themselves are, of course, the tamper evidence seals. These are going to be single-use physical barriers that are permanently altered or tampered with. Permanently altered if tampered with or removed. These should all be serially numbered. They can include your county name, easily inspected, and they come in a couple of different varieties, which we can share. So the two things that are important, one is they are tamper evident. So when you remove a seal, it usually involves breaking it or altering it in some permanent way, so that if you were to remove a tape seal, for example, it would show the word void so that you couldn't just reaffix it to the same container. They're also serially numbered so that you could identify each unique seal that you're breaking and applying to your containers. Oh, I'm sorry, here's an example of the tape seal itself. These can also be used to cover access points, latches, openings, really anything that's flat plastic made of metal. And again, when they're peeled back, the word void appears so they can't be reused. And we also have zip tie seals. And actually, I'm just going to move on to, since we're cutting close on time, just want to jump, if you could please jump to the best practices slide. So a couple best practices to, as you're going through your chain of custody process. One, we always recommend saving the broken seals. Again, if they're a tape seal, you can simply affix them to the back of your custody log. If it's a zip tie seal or a padlock seal, you can just drop it into the container itself. It's important to place your logs inside the containers before they are sealed. Always work in bipartisan teams. Always verify before initialing or signing. That kind of sounds silly, but it's during the election, you're sealing perhaps scores or dozens of items over and over, and someone comes up to you with a seal log and they say, I just need your initials. read the log, double check that it was filled out correctly. You don't want your initials on something that's incorrect. And always use a secure container. Seals themselves don't provide security, they provide evidence. So if you're not using a container that has a tight fitting lid, don't rely on the tape seal to keep that container shut. Use an appropriate container. So I apologize, I kind of flew through that, but I know we're bumping up to the hour, so I'm going to hand it back to Jen.
Thanks, Mike. Hopefully everybody can see there's so much more to this training and so much more to chain of custody. So we, again, encourage you at the end of the month, if you have not signed up for our newsletter, do that, because we'll let you get notified when this full training deck is available online, as well as an online self-guided as well as this training in an online self-guided form. Okay, so would not be an elections group training if we didn't conclude by talking about audits. Hopefully you're all familiar with the reports and recommendations we've made around election audits. If you're not, one of those includes doing an audit of your ballot accounting or your ballot management practices. A link to that those recommendations is available in the chat. It was posted early on. In a nutshell, at the end of the election, we still need a way for somebody to go in and ensure that all of these things that Matt and Mike covered got done, to ensure that votes have not been dropped or lost or added as a result of human error or failure of voting equipment, to ensure that the ballot record remains complete and intact from the moment ballots are cast through the audit. And again, as you've heard multiple times, providing that evidence that the ballot record is trustworthy. And when we do an audit, in a nutshell, it's somebody going through and verifying that those ballot accounting records were accurately and completely filled out, that the security seal numbers that have been recorded, somebody's verifying those, somebody's validating who signed the forms. Are those actually the people that were charged with completing that form? We want to verify the reconciliation forms against information from our voter registration database, that vote history credit, and the statement of votes cast from the voting system, and verifying the total number of ballots, for example, in your duplication or your replication log equals the physical number of original ballots. So it's really having someone independent of the person that completed that work go in and do one last check to ensure forms were completed fully, accurately, and that the information recorded on those forms checks out. Okay, we have gone through this with great speed. We're so excited that you were able to join us today. We're so excited to be able to share this, as I mentioned, at the end of the month in its full form. If you have recommendations for us, if you have questions for us, if there are things that we didn't cover, I tried to answer most of the questions directly in the Q&As, but if I didn't cover those, or there are things that you think we've missed and should include in our training, we're still finalizing that. So please do reach out to us. You can go to our website, electionsgroup.com, and use the contact form and let us know what you think. Let us know how we could make this as useful and usable for everybody, for yourselves, as well as the folks in your office. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Mike and Matt, for the great discussion, for the informative content that you provided. Again, the resources that we've talked about should have all been placed in the chat. And as always, our inbox is open. So whether it's ballot management or something else, if you've got an election question, you've got a resource that you're looking for and can't find, please reach out. If we don't have it, we probably know somebody that does. So thanks again, and have a great day.